to discuss together what they're going to do about the most urgent crisis in the world, the crisis of climate change. They are now in their 26th year, and for the 26th year in a row, they've discussed mightily, they've made eloquent speeches, and essentially done nothing. So over the weekend, hundreds of thousands of citizen activists gathered on the streets of Glasgow in the pouring rain, as it turned out. So it was a challenge to their fortitude and determination. But they nevertheless manifested. And we had reports from Glasgow of the deep consternation and anger and frustration on the part of citizen activists that have gathered from all over the world to challenge the governments in the face of code red, meaning that we're now in the climate tipping point to take the kind of remedial action that is requisite to ensure human survival as the climate now in earnest begins to spin out of control. Today in the news, there was a report from one of the NGOs that is present there in Glasgow, Global Witness, and they had some data I want to share as we open today because it gives a sense of why it is that the governments continue to refuse any meaningful action. They pointed out that the fossil fuel industry has the largest delegation in Glasgow, 503 people. Fossil fuel lobbyists are officially part of the Canadian and the Russian delegations. Fossil fuel representatives in total number are larger than the combined delegations of the 8 countries, all of which are in the global south, that are the most affected by climate change. And of course, the fossil fuel industry representatives dwarf by many orders of magnitude the representatives of the indigenous peoples, most of whom were challenged just financially to find tickets to make it to Glasgow during this time. The fossil fuel industry receives over $4 trillion a year from our governments, while alternative energy, clean technology has subsidies little over 150 billion, and that's only recently. So that statistic alone gives one insight into why, in the face of the most obvious, urgent, and time-sensitive crisis, probably in history, a crisis that could mean the extinction of humanity itself, our leaders have just kicked the ball down the trail for someone else to deal with it down the road. So it's in that context that we gather today on day 8 of the COP. We'll be talking about regenerative cities as the regeneration hubs of Gaia, of Mother Earth. We'll be talking just in a moment from the Global Regeneration Corps. We may be hearing from people there in Glasgow who will be calling in to give the latest reports on citizen action as the COP continues to unfold now in its final week. It ends this next Friday. But before we do that, everyone, let's just take a moment in all the consternation of the facts that we are challenged by each and every day. Just take a moment to engage in a pause, to center ourselves in our bodies. Take a breath. and align yourself with your heart. And for just a minute, attune yourself with your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude and love for each and every one of you who are joining our program today, we want to contemplate the role of cities around the planet and the accountability that they have at this moment to take the kind of action required, often in the face of national government inaction. Cities have been vibrant and regenerative and have demonstrated the kind of leadership that the world needs to solve the critical issues relevant to climate change. We're going to have the panel convened by Marilyn Hamilton, who's the founder of Integral Cities Meshworks, who's been working tirelessly for many, many years in galvanizing city action and city synergies around various issues of the environment and social justice. We'll hear from her in a moment. But we want to start with a presentation by Leslie Southwick Trask, who's the Chief Development Officer of Ubiquity University and the coordinator for the Global Regeneration Corps, to tell us a little bit more about the GRC, as she's been doing most of the days as the COP has been unfolding. We're launching the Global Regeneration Corps this week, when we are inviting organizations and individuals from around the world to join so that we can collectively build a global network of pods of regeneration first responders at this critical moment, when nothing less than the regeneration of the planetary ecosystem will suffice to ensure the continuity of humanity's presence on this very precious earth of ours. So thank you, everyone. And I now turn it over to Leslie, and Leslie then will turn it over to Marilyn, and then we will then commence our program. Thank you,
Thanks,
Leslie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. So welcome. I'm coming to you from the traditional land of the Niitsitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy. And today is an important day here in Canada because we are commemorating the Indigenous warriors who went to war in World War I, World War II, and in other wars that Canada fought and lost their lives. Too many ways, one might say, to wars that they did not enter. themselves, but as a colonized entity. So I do want to honor our Indigenous warriors who had lost their lives for our freedom. And the poppy represents for us the celebration and commemoration of those who gave their lives for our freedom. And freedom is what we are really fighting for in Glasgow. Freedom for our air, freedom for our water, freedom for our soil, so it may breathe and give life to itself and therefore to us. So in this moment, I just want to say welcome. I saw that my great friend Kurt Kruger has already put in the Global Regeneration Corps link into the chat, which is brilliant. And you can enter the Hive, which is our web around the world, by just taking a screenshot, putting your camera on the QR code just behind me, and it will take you automatically into the Hive. So if you're trying to find your Hive and you did it a little while ago, you just need to click on the QR code. It will take you right to your Hive, and then you can continue to explore. So in today's share, I just want to take us into, again, how you can get into the Hive, but importantly that you as you think about moving into the Hive, that you think about the Global Regeneration Corps, which is a movement of movements of movements. It's not an organization, it's a call to action. If you say, I just can't afford to join one more organization to save the planet, that's not what this is. This is actually connecting you to all what you are already connected to and allowing you to see who else is connected to you through the issues and challenges and projects that you're involved in. So this is why we're launching this during COP, is that we feel strongly that this is a moment in time for us to make the invisible visible. And while there may be way too many delegations from the oil and gas sector, particularly from my province in Alberta, we are a strong force that is gathering around the world to stand for a changing planet. And so this is how we're doing it, by coming together and making the invisible visible. So if I want to take action, I can go in and I can click on any one of these ways in terms of my entry. I can enter as an individual, I can enter as an organization, I can join a conversation, which would take me to UbiVerse, where we're posting articles and all the sessions that you've been a part of on that particular location on the UbiVerse. That is the GRC group on the UbiVerse. Or you can come in and join your Hive. So here's my Hive. And you already have, I've already shown this to you before, but I want to show you something super exciting today, because when I click on my second screen, yes, I get to see how I answered. So all of these orange circles are my responses to the questions. And I said, yes, I want to join a pod. And if I click on that, I will see all of the others around the globe who also want to join a pod. And I can connect with them because their email addresses are there. So this is the global commons, ladies and gentlemen. This is not an organization holding onto your data. You immediately see who you can connect to and say, okay, I want to join a pod. You want to join a pod. Let's do this. Now, maybe what I want to do also is find out how many phoenixes are out there in this world of the Global Regeneration Corps. And before I know it, I am going to see, because it's just loading, I'm going to see all of those. So here are all my joining pods, and here are all of my phoenixes that are also seeing that we can go into the degradation of our systems, of the mental health system, of our economic system, of our environmental systems, and we can in fact rise out of these ashes. So today, go into your pod, into your Hive, and click on any one of your answers to see who around the globe is connected to you. You are in the center. This is your universe of understanding your invisible and now visible connections to everyone. And just on the third screen, as you know, this is where we get to see who around the world is joining us on this excursion. And we're going to see this beautiful globe, and all of those icons of the GRC are showing us people who are stepping into the space and saying, I want to make my voice visible. We can sit here and watch and learn from these marvelous presenters, but what are we going to do about it? And are we going to lend our voice into this change? And so we are gathering from around the globe, as you will see, players, members, phoenixes, butterflies, every earthworms that are part and parcel of our changing agenda. So when I think about what I can do, I can connect. The COVID gave us a gift of virtual reality in terms of our deeper connections with each other on a screen. And so this is where we are really leaning into, I can in fact be part with you, standing by you, if I know you're there and if I know what you're standing for, and I can find this out now through my hive. So, I'm just going to leave on this one thought, and that was a statement made by Barack Obama this morning at COP. And he said, it can get overwhelming when you think about what we need to do. And it's easy to slip into cynicism. But cynicism is the recourse of the coward. Because it's easy to say it's not going to work. It's easy to say we can't do this. It's harder, it takes more courage to say, we can do something every minute of every day. But what? Let's find out what we can do in our cities. I'm coming to you from Calgary, Alberta, and I'm so delighted that our convener today is Marilyn Hamilton, a friend, a colleague, a rockin' girl when it comes to bringing life to the cities, the living organisms of what they are. I've learned so much from this leader in the regenerative space. And I know that you're going to learn so much from her, and I will too today. So Marilyn, you've got a great panel together. I hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Leslie. And I'm particularly partial to the hive because I often call cities the human hive. So I am delighted and honored to convene the panel today on cities as regenerative hubs. So let me just share my screen and I'll set us up for an exploration.
You're good, Marilyn.
Thank you. So cities, I believe, are Gaia's regeneration hubs. Why cities? Well, cities occupy 2.6% of the Earth's crust, and they're home to more than 50% of the population. If you zoom out to some of the dates we're looking at COP, by 2050, you can add another 32% of the population. So we'll have over 80% of the population in cities by 2050. Cities generate 80% of the GDPs. They use 75% of all natural resources. However, they're evolving faster than at any point in history. I think cities can be Earth rebooters. They could be incubators and hubs of regeneration for Gaia. I think cities will transform ineffective politics into effective schools for regeneration across the planet. Cities have the capacity to design policies that align a healthy inner climate of mindsets and cultures to enable the healthy outer climate that we're looking for of the environment and social justices. Cities have the opportunity to serve all life on the planet by implementing circular economies. And I believe cities should serve multiple generations who can become students in schools for regeneration. And as Leslie just introduced us to the Global Regeneration Core and the Hive, also through our Master of Regenerative Action at Ubiquity. There is a need in cities for deep leadership that can be resourceful for all ecosystems inside the city and also the surrounding ecoregions. What we need is a master code of care for planet, place, people, and person. This master code of care for planet, place, people, and person, I think will become our new governance system because it can link the context, the capacities, and the collaborations that we have already in cities and transform cities into a planetary meshwork of Gaia's regeneration hubs. Cities also thoughtfully and heartfully have the capacity to align all bioregions, as Ed Muller has been making us so aware during these explorations in Humanity Rising last week. We need these bioregions so that we are intimately connected and understand our supply chains in a way that they support all life. When I say that cities engage people, then they need to engage what I call the four voices. And that is meaning not just the mayors and civic managers, but also business innovators, the third sector, and especially citizens. And on this slide, we've just organized a number of the associations, organizations, and connections that already are linking these four voices. Business innovators, you can look at the wonderful organization interface that is related to the recycling of carpet, the Biomimicry Institute, IKEA. Civic managers, of course, can be through ICLEA, the local governments for sustainability. C40s Cities, the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which includes over 10,000 mayors from our cities, climate mayors, and Mayors' National Climate Action Agenda. Of course, citizens have their own way of making signs and symbols and icons, and we're striving to hear as many of those voices as we can here during our broadcasts. And we want those young voices to come in, the voices of all citizens, and many of them have not been able to make it to Glasgow. So every way that we can open up our connections to citizens is really vital because they are the majority of the voices in the cities. And then the last voice is the civil society, for which there are, again, many organizations, the Climate Reality Project, the Climate Coalition, and of course, one that Greta has made very famous, Fridays for Future. You know, as cities develop, they actually have the capacity to add capacity. As they develop, they become increasingly supportive of a variety of expressions of diversity, traits, and behavior. If you're using an integral quadrant model, this is the upper right-hand quadrant for actions. Cities grow by empowering learning, development, and change for personal intentions. This is the upper left quadrant of thinking and learning. They also grow economically through inter and intra-connections, therefore increasingly effective and efficient results. This is where we would point to lower right productivity. And as they grow, they enable the mutuality of people amongst them, thus broadening moral, cultural, and relationship spans. And in the integral model, we would call this lower left relationships. So as cities evolve, they become increasingly generative, renewing, and innovative. They're respectful of a longer decision time horizon. They consider decisions' impact on a longer time span. They're able to act locally with an awareness of larger spatial horizons, and they're impactful of a larger and more spatially distributed population. Cities, as they evolve, become interconnected in their capacities and intra-connected between each other in their contributions to global well-being. So I think it is time now for us to look for a whole new generation of team regeneration responders. And they must go out all the way to the 7th generation, as our Indigenous peoples teach us. We know that the donut economics, and we have somebody on our panel who will speak to this, cities need donut economic dashboards so that they can track social justice and ecological constraints. And with those donut economic dimensions, then we're able to make some sense on how to reconcile the inner social foundations that the SDGs set out with the outer ecological ceilings that our scientists through Rockstrom et al. Have brought to our attention. So together with Ubiquity University, Integral City brings these the GPS of these 12 intelligences that is really energized by an evolutionary impulse at the center. And it is impulsing through the inner and outer cultural and social integral frames for cities and intelligences for cities, the strategic intelligences of inquiry, navigating, and meshworking, and the contexting intelligence of integral living, ecological, and emergence. So there is a way for us to create a direction forward when we use the intelligences that we have been naturally given. At the city scale, I think we do need to use this master code of care for the planet, for the place, for our people, and for person. This parses in both directions. So we need to make our decisions through the master code of care for person, people, place, and planet. And when we do that, then we can see that Gaia's reflective organs really are cities. James Lovelock says humans are Gaia's reflective organs. I think cities are the organs, and that they pulse with life when we live the master code, because that means we're caring for self, others, place, and planet simultaneously. One of the ways that we recognize this is on an annual basis, we award an Integral City of the Year. In 2019, it was Amsterdam. And perhaps we'll hear why Amsterdam was one of the first cities to adopt donut economics. But we were able to point out when we made the award that Amsterdam was actually enacting all 12 of those intelligences on the Integral City GPS. And at the same time, we do recognize Mesh Workers of the Year. And in 2021, we're really proud to say it's Jim Garrison, who is the person behind Humanity Rising, along with his team, and has brought not only all of the 320 odd days that happened at the point that we made this award, but since then, this is the 358th day of Humanity Rising. And with this 12 days reporting from COP26, I think it's really quite a significant way of interconnecting and meshworking all of the elements of our master code. So thank you, Jim. And then the last slide I want to share with you might surprise you, because I want to summarize by saying that I think it is possible to transform cities into a planetary meshwork of Gaia's regeneration hubs. And the surprise is, this is a slide that comes from Russia and their Living Cities Association, where they are taking person, people, place, and planet, and they are intending and already acting on changing 1,000 cities by 2030. And I know because I've already seen the evidence that they've already changed 300 to 400 cities. So with those words, I'm going to ask Rick Buckley to put the links that I've put at the end of this slide set for you in the chat so you can follow up on them and see all the ways that we've been exploring how cities can actually be the solutions for responding to Code Red through regenerative action. We are obviously well connected with Ubiquity, and those links include the courses of Beyond Smart, Beyond Resilient, and our whole Master in Regenerative Action degree, which is unique in the world. So now that I've introduced the frame for today of looking at cities as Gaia's regeneration hubs, I would like to introduce our wonderful panel. So I'd ask them to turn on their videos and for Rick to show and highlight our panel, who includes Monica Sharma, Colleen Vogel, Lenora Grechva, and Duncan Crowley. Let me give them each a little introduction because they have an incredible background, and I'd like you to appreciate the wisdom that has joined us on this panel today. So firstly, let me introduce Monica Sharma. Dr. Monica Sharma initially trained as a physician and epidemiologist and worked for the United Nations for 22 years in leadership and capacity building. She has published and presented over 250 articles in journals and international forums, and currently engages worldwide as an international expert and practitioner on leadership development for sustainable and equitable change. She is currently engaged with over 20 organizations worldwide and works with the United Nations, universities, management institutions, governments, business, media, and community organizations. Dr. Monica Sharma is delivering transformational leadership programs all over the world. And as a practitioner, her proven track record of generating measurable results at scale, as well as enhancing leadership, is unique. She designs and facilitates programs for whole systems transformation and leadership development in both developed and developing countries. She created a unique conscious full spectrum model and generated equitable and sustainable results related to several sustainable development goals worldwide. Her recent book, Radical Transformational Leadership, Strategic Action for Change Agents, was a gold winner in the Nautilus Book Awards. The second panelist I would like to introduce is Dr. Lenora Grechba. She is the Cities and Regions lead for Donut Economics Action Lab. Donut Economic Action Lab's engagement with cities, municipalities, and other place-based administrations is where she is focused. And those are many that are interested in putting donut economics into practice in their own context. Lenora is an urban planner, researcher, and participation practitioner. She has over a decade of experience facilitating engagement with communities, cities, and regions globally through her work as an urban planning consultant for UN Habitat, a city leadership associate for University College London, and a community engagement consultant for built environment projects in the UK. She studied architecture in her home country, Macedonia, and holds a master's in human settlement from KU Leuven in Belgium and a PhD in urbanism from the IUAV University of Venice, Italy. And my third panelist that I'd like to introduce is Duncan Crowley. He is the co-president of EcoLease, organizer of Urban Arena Europe, and founder of Donut Economics, Portugal. Duncan Crowley has long been interested in greening cities and connecting communities. From Dublin, Barcelona, Curitiba to Lisbon, Duncan is an Irish architect and a PhD student whose work uses action research to bridge activism and academia to examine community-led responses to climate breakdown. His Architecture of Contemporary Metropolitan Territories for his PhD in Lisbon explores what processes, structures, or forms can enable the scaling of the global eco-village network to transform modern global cities into eco-cities. He also works on the European Urban Arena project for sustainable and just cities. While living in Curitiba, Brazil, he attained a master's in environment and development. While living in Barcelona before that, he co-founded the local transition group, gained a permaculture design certificate at Mas Franche, and was active in the Barcelona Indignado Square occupation of 2011. He's part of Degrowth, Extinction Rebellion, and Indomedia, and loves adventures, standing in rivers, and reading Corto Maltese or Asterix books. And our fourth panelist is Dr. Colleen Vogel. She is a distinguished professor at the University of the Witwatersrand, South Africa. She has a PhD in geography and environmental studies from WITS. She's a climatologist by training and has increasingly worked in the social dimensions of climate change, focusing on climate change adaptation. At the international scale, she has been chair and vice chair of various international global environmental change scientific committees. For example, the International Human Dimensions Program and the Land Use Cover Change Program, and been engaged in Future Earth. She was chapter lead author and co-author of chapters in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, the 4th and 5th assessment reports. Together with other scientists, the work for the IPCC was honored with the Nobel Peace Prize. And she has also received the Bertoni Award for her international work on climate change advocacy and the science of climate change adaptation. Colleen's research includes how climate information can be used to enhance risk assessment using transdisciplinary research approaches, enhancing city climate change adaptation work, and youth agency and capacity enhancement processes. And finally, teaching and mentoring the next generation of scholars and practitioners. So welcome, my esteemed panel. I wanted you to hear each other's wonderful backgrounds, as well as for our audience to appreciate who you are and what depth of experience you bring here today. I thank you for taking your time to share your wisdom. And I wanted to start us off with just a couple of questions. And I'm going to suggest that we start with Colleen and then go to Lenora. And you may respond to the questions through either just speaking to us in conversation, or you may have slides and just let us know and we'll support you for doing that. So the questions I've asked is, what and how at COP26 have you noticed decisions and goals that are going to impact city well-being? That's the first question. And then the second is, how can cities respond, adapt, and rejuvenate as vital actors in Gaia's climate change conditions? I said rejuvenate. I think I could really more rightly say regenerate, but they may go together. So, Colleen, can we start with you?
Sure. I hope you can see my slides. Can you see them?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Well, I just want to say thank you so much. This is an extreme honor. I've been following the Humanity Rising since the beginning, and I'm just overwhelmed being on.
We lost your audio. Was it Colleen talking?
Yes. Can you check
Colleen,
your audio?
Check your
Yeah.
computer audio. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you. Thank you.
Okay, can I go back to my slides?
Yes, go back to full screen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I just was maybe so excited that I was dumbstruck and you couldn't hear me. I just wanted to acknowledge also the traditional and indigenous peoples that are being commemorated for what they've done in the past. So I've chosen to show a few slides just to give some background on the IPCC, but then also to bring in other perspectives, because in my view, having been a scientist for about 40 years now, working in this space with many wonderful colleagues, I don't believe science is going to be enough to get us over the finishing line. So I'm going to talk a bit about the IPCC. I'll then talk a little bit about City of Johannesburg work, and then talk about my recent passion, engaging with citizens in the city, namely the youth of Johannesburg. So as you can see from this slide, there have been a number of assessment reports which eventually become the gold standard for the actual evidence base that goes into the COPs and gives us the science-based evidence. And as you can see, there have been a number of these. I've been very fortunate to work with other colleagues on these assessments, and also been engaged in reviewing and also leading some of the bigger efforts, particularly in the African context. So these are very, very important. They're quite laborious processes. We work for years. We don't get paid for this work, but we try and synthesize and bring forward the science that we have today. So we don't do new science, but we try and crystallize what is coming forward. And the recent report, the report that has just come out on the physical science base, is really what triggered the alarm bells. Obviously, they've been ringing for many years now, but convinced, I think, the United Nations to call it Code Red. So as you can see, I'm not going to go into this into too much detail because I'm sure many of you are familiar with what the science is saying, but essentially you can see the black line, which is the trajectory of where we are going in terms of our global surface temperatures. And we've essentially got a number of, if you like, categories or transitions into which we can follow, pathways. And obviously we want to try and follow the blue line that you can see there, and we don't want to try and be doing business as usual, which is the red line. But the sad story is, linking back to the COP, is that this is going to take massive, massive effort and very significant changes, both personally, practically, and politically, which I'll come back to. But for many of us, particularly those who come from the South, and I'm very grateful for being able to share a Southern perspective here today, very often we hear a lot and often the Southern voices and the African voices in particular are not always surfaced and heard. And as you can see, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. Africa, if you look at any of these maps, whether we're going through a 3-degree or a 4-degree warming, has been singled out as one of the most vulnerable continents in Southern Africa and also in the rest of Africa. It is projected that we will warm up at twice the global average. So we're already at risk. We're already at risk because we're coming from low bases. In many cases in Africa, we have complex political situations. We have very vulnerable communities, etc. So these are very stark messages. But it's not only about the science. And obviously I'm a scientist, so I actually admire people who do science, and I'm not trying to denigrate the science at all. But I do think, as Marilyn has suggested, that there are other lenses and perspectives that need to come to the fore. And this is work that we've been trying to do, where we try and link the science and make it more accessible and more useful, if you like, to various actors in, if you like, a city context or in any context. And here you'll see the inner core of that is environmental value.
Colleen, we've lost your audio. Colleen? Colleen, it seems like when you move your arms, we're losing the audio.
Can you hear me now?
You're garbled.
Can you hear me now?
Try turning off your video and let's see if we can get more bandwidth for your audio.
Okay, thank you. I'll try that.
You can leave the slideshow up.
Okay, I'll do that. Can you
That's
hear me?
much better. Yeah, that's much better.
So apologies, we are going through severe load shedding in Africa, in South Africa, and so the electricity signals are being interfered with, I think, in the mast towers. So real realities, if you like, talking about climate change. Anyway, to come back to what I was talking about, and I'll try and not be too expressive with waving my arms, but the inner core, then looking at the social structures, the individual agency, youth engagement, and ultimately transformative theories of change. So we try and work across a spectrum. And I'm very, very privileged to be very close friends for many years and working very close with Professor Karen O'Brien, who many of you know. And Karen has done a remarkable job of trying to link and show the different perspectives that are needed in any context, not least in a city context. And what's so neat about what Karen has done, and I really want this to be the take-home message today, is that she has taken Danilo Meadows' work, who is also a doyen in the ways of thinking around some of these complex issues, starting with the system, but then moving up the scale in terms of what is required practically, what might be required politically, and what might be required personally. And you'll see right at the top, I hope you can see clearly, is the ability to transcend paradigms. So for me, having worked as a scientist in both sides of the spectrum, if you like, from the hardcore technical science right the way across to the social sciences, humanities, working with artists, other ways of looking at the world, local knowledges, tacit knowledges. These are the types of things that I really think are going to be required. And it's not just the technical. Much of the COP last week was focused a lot on technology. That's not to say that this isn't important, but I think we need more. It's technology plus. And I think sometimes we need to come back to the heart of transformation, which is really important. So with that as background, I now just want to turn to the city of Johannesburg and root it into the African cities work, which has been part of the C40s Cities movement. That has been a worldwide set of initiatives, and the C40s have partnered with cities. In our case, in Johannesburg, they had an intern and a collaborator within the city who helped the city try and develop a climate action plan. So we've been working with the city of Johannesburg for over 6 years, and I work with other cities in Africa, including my neighboring cities like Cape Town and others. But for me, and I'm going to really leave this as my take-home message of note, the most exciting thing in my 40 years of working on climate change has been working with the energy, because I think we all need energy. I don't know about you, but I'm quite tired of COPs and, well, not necessarily, well, COPs to say, but I don't want to quote, Greta Thunberg, but I'm tired of Zooms. I'm tired of, all the talking that we do. But when you engage with this energetic, passionate group of people who are going to be the future, they will be receiving our wisdoms, hopefully, that we take forward. And I've been really, really fortunate to be working with the South African Institute of International Affairs, who have been galvanizing and drawing together the youth in Africa, including South Africa, working with a cohort range from about 15 years up to 30 years. So it's school children all the way up to early career. And what's been amazing is that this group haven't just been the victims or the tick box. They've been very adamant that they did not want to be the tick box. And this is why I want to bring the synergies of what Marilyn spoke about earlier, about the voices, whose voices count in these debates. And for me, the reason why I'm so excited and so proud to share what they've done is that I think it is the first that I've seen in the world, actually, of what they did. So let me just step back very quickly to say what they've done. So through the work that we've linked them into with the city of Johannesburg, they helped to develop the Johannesburg Climate Action Plan, which, as I showed you, was linked into C40. But what was fascinating and absolutely wonderful was that their foreword that they wrote was actually included into the foreword of the city of Johannesburg, and their mobilization of stakeholder strategies was included into the document. And they now are becoming implementers of this climate action plan. And I just want to read this. I hope I can do it fairly quickly. I don't want to take up too much time. We're in a situation of urgency, severity, and scope never before faced by humankind. So far, our response isn't anywhere close to adequate. But you already know that. You know it in your gut, in your bones. We are each part of the planet's living systems, knitted together with almost 7.7 billion human beings and 1.8 million known species. We can feel the connections between us. We can feel the brokenness and the closing window to heal it. This earth, our home, is telling us that a better way of being must emerge, and fast. The science is clear. According to the IPCC, we need to limit the rise in global temperature to 1.5 by 2030. We are already experiencing the effects of climate change, with vulnerable communities experiencing the effects more severely. The time to act is now. And as I say, what made me so proud was when the city said, "Gosh, Professor, you wrote a lovely foreword for the youth." And I said, no, not at all. This was written by the youth themselves. They also drew out ideas of intersectionality, climate justice, etc., all contained in that document. What they've also done is now to take their youth climate action plan up to the national level. And about 2 weeks ago, they presented their climate action plan for the country to the ministries that were at the launch and were required to actually take this forward. And they've also been present at the COP. So in conclusion, as I get ready to end what I've been trying to say, I'd like to connect everything back to this lovely diagram that comes from a colleague in Malaysia. And so in conclusion,
We're losing you again, Colleen.
okay, I'll try. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
you're
now?
back. You're back. Okay.
Sorry about that. I apologize for those interruptions. But really,
Oops, you faded out again.
you know?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll stay very rigidly still. But this really is my last slide. The three areas that I just want to kind of bring home is to say what I've tried to share with you is both the hardware, the technological solutions, the modeling, the climate modeling, which I've been so privileged to share and work with colleagues in the IPCC. We also need the policy, the institutions, the arts, and the social media, again, with many that I've worked with in the software. But I really honestly believe that unless we get the hardware right, what is it that motivates us for long-term collective action? I don't think we're really going to turn a corner. And Salim Hook the other day, who's a major scientist working and being very present at the COP, he said his hope is that, and I hope I quote him correctly, he said he hopes we don't get bogged down in compensation debates about how much finances every country needs, although that's important. But he said we really need to move towards solidarity. And so with that, I'd like to thank you so much. I apologize for dipping in and out, but I think part of it is because of load shedding. But I hope that we do have reasons for hope. And again, thank you so, so much for being able to be part of this illustrious effort and particularly to be part of Humanity Rising. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Colleen. Beautifully done. You provided a really beautiful gateway for us to follow through and invite the next panelist in. And I'd like to invite Lenora, and we will come to some of the questions that I'm seeing in the chat and other places after Lenora speaks, as she has to leave a little earlier. So Lenora, would you like to just tell us your perspectives from Donut Economics Action Lab?
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Colleen, for that presentation. It's really a privilege to be here and part of this movement and part of this amazing panel. You asked us to reflect a bit on what we've been hearing from COP, Marilyn, and what thoughts we've been having about the impact on cities and on how cities can move forward. And I wanted to start by reflecting on one thing in particular that Colleen so wonderfully already started talking about, and that is the need for systems thinking and the needs for a systems approach that I feel like is strongly lacking. The climate crisis is an incredibly complex issue, one that most of us barely understand, but we study the science of it. We understand that it's caused by greenhouse gases. We measure the carbon dioxide emissions, but that's just one part of the story. And that's just one element of a much bigger, much wider planetary crisis. And we cannot talk about climate change without talking about the loss of biodiversity, about the state of our polluted oceans, about the health of our soils that we've over-fertilized. And at the same time, we cannot talk about climate change without talking about social justice, the incomes and livelihoods that are already impacted by its effects, the relevance of a just transition to new industries, the access to food and water that will be compromised for many, the peace and justice that may be challenged for many communities and cities as resources become compromised and places inhabitable. And an issue this complex must be discussed and tackled with systems thinking, with systems approaches. And my sense is that while there are many amazing events and debates and organizations that are doing this here and as part of other debates close to COP, it isn't the overarching approach. It's not how the agendas are framed. It's not how the negotiations and the high-level discussions are framed. It's not what is publicly communicated or shared in the media. It's not how people on the street read and talk about climate change. It's what we're hearing is very focused on singular issues to tackle: phase out coal, scale up renewable energy, switch to electric vehicles, stop deforestation, adapt and mitigate. And obviously, these are all the crucial things that we should be doing. But we have to look at them together as the complex systems that they are. And if we did, and when we do look at all of this together, we become more able to clearly see the big picture, the holistic picture. And that's that our economic systems that are built around endless growth aren't fit for purpose. And that there's growing scientific data that sustaining Earth life supporting systems isn't compatible with the growth-based systems that we've inherited. And so we have to start understanding and talking that we need new systems and new visions of what progress should look like. Visions that look at humans and at the planet holistically, and that look at our cities holistically. And as you know, and as you've already started mentioning yourself, Marilyn, this is at the core of donut economics and at the core of the cities work that we do. And this system's big picture thinking is crucial for cities. That's where the climate impacts are seen. It's where there's so much of climate action will be taking place. And I can share, if I can share my screen for just a second to briefly go through the concepts of donut economics that I'm sure are familiar to many of you, and how we use this to bring that big picture thinking and systemic thinking to cities, which we feel is so important for how we tackle the crisis that we find ourselves in. So this is the image of donut economics that we like to call the compass for human prosperity. And really it's setting this new vision for progress that's no longer based on that endless curve of growth, but rather we're looking at, if we're looking at the middle of this image as the use of, as humanity's use of Earth resources radiating towards the outer circles, on the inner circle is the social foundation. So we want to get all the people outside of that hole in the middle. This is where people are falling short on life's essential. They don't have enough energy, enough water, enough food, enough health, enough housing, gender equality, and social equity. So we want to use enough so that everybody goes across that social foundation and into the safe and just space for humanity, into that green donut. However, we cannot let our collective use of resources put pressures on the ecological ceiling, the outer circle of the donut, because when we do that, when we use too much resources, this is when we start breaking down Earth systems. We cause climate change, and we pollute the air. We cause biodiversity loss. We convert too much land. And this is the challenge of our generation, of the 21st century, is to balance these two things, to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And these, the donut, the inner indicators, the themes of the social foundation are drawn from sustainable development goals, while the ecological ceiling, the outside themes, are drawn from the 9 planetary boundaries identified by Earth system scientists just over a decade ago, that show us that we need to be looking at much more than just climate change if we want to keep our delicate planet into balance. So if this is the goal of where we need to get to, that green safe space of the donut, unfortunately, this is where we currently are. This is what we can call the selfie of humanity right now. So based on quantifiable indicators, this is how humanity is doing right now. There are millions, billions of people living in deprivation, those red areas on the inner circle that are falling short on life's essentials, while at the same time we have pushed and put pressure on multiple of the planetary boundaries. We've converted too much land, we've caused climate change, we've caused too much biodiversity loss. So we are the first generation to have the knowledge, to have the science, to be able to see this selfie, to realize where we are and to start doing something about reversing this story, about moving towards that safe and just space in the middle. So how do we, and the path for all of us, the path of all of our countries and all of our cities towards that just space will be very different, depends on where we are. And in this in this diagram, we can see that no country, based on the donut portrait that has been developed by scientists at Leeds University for over 150 countries globally, no country is currently living within that safe and just space of the donut. And this is why we like to say there are no developing and developed countries. This dichotomy isn't really reflective of the reality that we find ourselves in. All countries are developing because no country is living in that safe and just space. Some of them have to develop, a lot still to meet their social needs, while many have to put a lot of stress on reducing their ecological impacts. So when we, to kind of focus, to come back to what we're talking about today, which is cities. And we at the Donut Economics Action Lab are starting to work with many ambitious and innovative cities globally that are, starting to set this high ambitions to aim to live in that safe and just space for humanity. And the kind of the donut thinking that we bring to cities and where we start our work with them and the conversation is through this approach, really. If we take the donut and if we unroll it, so if we really zoom in to that green space, we can start envisioning the future of cities we want. And this is about acknowledging that when we look at places, when we downscale that global donut image to the scale of a place, we need to be acknowledging that we need to be having both local aspirations at cities, while also having global accountabilities, global responsibilities to the world and to the planet that we're connected with. And so starting our work with cities and starting kind of that systems thinking about tackling all the emergencies of today, we're asking one big question. How can our city become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? And this question embeds 4 different questions. How can all the people of our city thrive? How can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? How can our city respect the health of the whole planet? And how can our city respect the well-being of all people? And I'm just going to spend a second on all of these 4 lenses that are the spines of our work with cities and of this systems way of thinking. So if we explore each of these lenses, starting with the local dimension and asking and thinking about the social foundations locally, we ask, how can all the people of our city thrive? And we can explore this, looking at all the dimensions in the icons on the bottom. We can explore this through many ways and through many questions. We can ask, what does thriving mean to people here? It's very different from community to community and city to city, from neighborhood to neighborhood. What thriving means to you? What do people need to be happy, to be dignified, to be safe? We can ask, how can every family have a decent home? How can we plan our cities and design our cities so that housing is a human right, and so that we respond to different types of family, different types of communities, whose voices are not being heard, who is left marginalized when we're building, when we're designing, when we're making policies in our cities, whether it's homeless people, whether it's young people and children, whether it's marginalized communities, undocumented immigrants, who is being left out of the conversation, left out on the margins. And then we move forward to think about the local ecology, and we ask, how can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? And this is about, and most of you here will know and feel this so strongly, acknowledging that all of our cities are based in and next to a natural habitat. And if we were to look at the closest healthy nature next to us, what can we learn from nature? And how can we match and imitate that through the buildings we made, through the cities we design? how can we learn to be as generous in nature? How can we go much beyond being sustainable and sustaining the nature and towards being regenerative and restoring our local ecologies? And we can explore this lens, asking, how can we store as much carbon as the forest next door stores and harvest as much solar energy, whether it's through green rooftops and facades, through planting urban forests, through maintaining our existing greenery? How can we better manage water and build more soil, whether it's through keeping urban wetlands, through leaving as many of our roads and our developments and our neighborhoods porous so that our soils can receive the rain and remain healthy and cycle water? How can we welcome more wildlife? How can we allow life to flourish, whether it's through building wildlife corridors over highways, whether it's through living pathways so that the squirrels and foxes and monkeys can pass by between neighborhoods and find food. And then once we've looked at these two local scales, we zoom out and we start thinking about our global responsibilities, our global connections. And we start asking, how can our city respect the health of the whole planet? And this is about acknowledging that everything we use in our cities, the food we eat, the clothes we buy, the electronics, the household, the buildings we build, everything leaves a global footprint on our planet. And we can, looking across these icons on the top, these 9 planetary boundaries, we can look at this bigger picture and ask ourselves, how can we respect the health of the whole planet in how we plan and manage our cities? How can we build circularly, thinking of the full life cycles of buildings, thinking what happens to the materials of buildings when they're demolished, and how can we continuously reuse the same things without digging more into Earth's resources? And how can we reduce our impacts, our construction, our demolition by retrofitting, by using what's already there? And how can we produce locally to reduce our global impact? How can we create incentives and policies and places and spaces to produce food locally so that we reduce our massive global impact through importing food nationally and internationally that most of us, especially in the developed world, do? And finally, the fourth lens is about acknowledging our global connections to communities worldwide. And again, looking at everything we use and we produce in our cities, the food, the construction, the electronics, it's about acknowledging that there's labor behind all of this. And there is impact behind every material we use, every food we consume, everything that takes place in our cities. And we can, start asking ourselves, specifically thinking about global supply chains. What are the brands and retailers that are selling things here, and what is the impact on global communities that we have by using these products? How are the construction elements we use produced? Where are the raw materials coming from? What were the working conditions of the people that mined them, that worked in the factories to produce this thing, that worked in the storages and in the transport facilities? And what happens to the construction waste we produce? Where does this waste go? And what is all the waste we produce in cities that so often gets exported to other countries? What is the impact on other communities? And when we bring these 4 lessons together, this becomes kind of a holistic way to think about our future cities, to start planning places that can be both allowing local people to thrive, to live safely and dignifiedly while restoring the local ecology, while protecting the health of the planet and caring for the well-being of all people. And this is an approach, this kind of holistic thinking, this systems thinking, which I think is so needed right now in the crisis and so lacking in the climate change discussions surrounding COP, is something that we're using with cities that are looking to put donut economics into action. And they're doing it in many different ways. Whether it's, to hold massive participatory conversations and bring a lot of voices together like they've done in Melbourne, building a kind of a co-created participatory vision for everybody, or whether it's like Amsterdam has done to build a set of metrics, 21st century metrics that aren't, the city's GDP, that aren't those kind of limited economic metrics, but there are metrics across the four lenses that create the real pictures of how our city is doing, and real pathways on how to move forward with this holistic vision of progress. Kind of Amsterdam has built that city portrait, that set of metrics, and have embedded donut economics thinking into their circular strategy and into their circular ambition. And Brussels have also built a regional portrait and have also started looking at integrating donut economics on many levels, from the regional level through the much lower level of reviewing individual policies and projects, thinking how can any policy, how can any project be improved once we put it in the middle of these four lenses and start asking the question, how can this be better? How can we do more? And this is something that we want to put forward, and something that we think is within the power of cities to do. There is so much, and I certainly invite everybody to explore the innovative and the inspirational work that not only cities but also communities, individuals and teachers and educators are doing with donut economics globally. But I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. And I realize I am over my time, so I'm just as a final reflection, I wanted to say that so much of the discussions in COP are about the finance that is needed, the finance agreements that are needed at a national level, and the finance that is needed for cities to move forward with climate action. And obviously this is crucial, but to recognize, there is power in recognizing that cities can do so much more with all the actors of the city, not just city administrations, but once you start recognizing the full ecosystems of its citizens, its organizations, its researchers, its businesses, its industries, and jointly use these holistic systems way of working together, there's so much potential there to do action without that dreaded dependency on high-level finance as well. And I'll leave it here.
Thank you, Lenora. I'm sure we would all like to just listen to you for the rest of the session. I know that you have to leave shortly. Are you open to a question that's come in, or do you have to go before I can ask you?
I can stay for 15 more minutes.
Okay, great. Well, I'll give you the question that's come in from Ben Levi, because he's actually looking at what's the boundary between cities and non-cities. And what's so beautiful with the donut economics is that you look at how can we be like the wildland next door. So he's asking, since he lives in a wildland corridor, is he part of the city? Or where does the ecoregion start and end? And maybe we should be talking about bioregion hubs, which is certainly something that Ed Muller has been looking at. But I'm just curious, from your perspective, how do you handle that question?
Well, thank you for that question, Ben. It's not one with an easy answer, because cities aren't actually defined. If you start digging into research on urban areas and on human settlements, you realize that the definition of what cities are can be very blurry, understandably so, because there isn't a harsh limit in where does cities stop and nature begin. And especially with this perspective, we want to acknowledge that nature should always be a part of cities. I think the reality, the reality that yes, and there's a concept of urban-rural intersectional areas. I'm looking at the chat as well. The complex reality is that city actions are often bound by city administrations, and city administrations are defined with specific boundaries. And many of you will recognize that this is one of the bigger challenges of cities today, especially as cities grow, as their boundaries change, and and as the actual human settlements pour out of the municipality boundaries, they end up merging into bigger boundaries. they end up, people and nature end up being in between regions that are governed by multiple jurisdictions. So, I mean, in conclusion, I have unfortunately no good answer here, apart that it's actually a question that we need to be keeping alive, because it is one that keeps on coming up as an obstacle, and it's, when I talk about collaborating on a city scale, it actually always needs to be bigger than that, because cities never end in their boundary. We always need to be looking, whether it's a regional government, whether it's many municipalities, whether it's communities that are living in between, and whether it's just the natural world that is no specific administrative boundary. We just need to keep on asking that question and reminding ourselves that that question is alive, and that if we have a set of data information about a city based on a very strict boundary in front of us, that's not the full picture.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I always respond to that question as start anywhere and follow where it leads. And then I've been playing with the idea of even right-sizing cities in relation to the ecological constraints, which I think is a very much even larger question, but one that I'm daring to ask. Yeah, so thank you, Lenora. And I'm just going to ask the rest of our panel, since we will be losing Lenora in a few minutes. Did any of you have a question that you would like to ask Lenora before she leaves? Monica, Duncan, Colleen, just unmute yourself if you do.
I wonder if I could ask a question, if I may.
Yes, go ahead, Colleen.
Thanks. Lenore, thank you very, very much. I just wondered, could you give us, are there examples of southern cities that are taking this on? The examples all seem to be, or mostly like Brussels, Amsterdam, etc. And I just wondered if there are southern cities, when in Africa or South America, Latin America, that one can find out about. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Yes, there are. I mean, the kind of those examples are, the truth is that this is also new, like cities working with donut economics is very new. We're kind of innovating, we're learning with and from cities as we go along. So the examples are just because the Amsterdam was the first to start, and therefore is kind of most ahead on the curve. And that was just over a year ago. So there are many from the community point of view, from actual communities and community groups doing action. You will be able to see many examples already on, if you go on our platform, from all the continents except Antarctica. But from a city point of view, there are many cities that are currently exploring this in the global south as well. There are cities in South Africa that we've talked to, and in India that we've talked to, and in Colombia and in Chile, and in there are actually quite a few in the Middle East as well. But you will recognize, I mean, if any of you that have worked with city, you will recognize that city administrations are kind of complex and tricky, and internal explorations cannot be always, shared with the public. They're all very early in their stages of exploration. They haven't developed a policy already, like Amsterdam and Brussels have, but they're starting their journey. So I'm really looking forward to, having this presentation, having these conversations a few months from now, half a year from now, 1 year from now, when we'll have amazing examples from outside of Europe and the Western world as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the question, Colleen and Lenora. And I'm going to just manage our time now and do a little pivot to somebody who's been in Glasgow, has traveled over to Edinburgh today, and that's Dita Vizoso, as she would like to give us an update around some engagement she's had with Africans, if I'm understanding right. Dita, welcome. And thank you, Lenora. If you have to leave, we will miss you, but stay as long as you can.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Yes, I would love, I'm not going to say much. The mood, everything is just such a diversity in Glasgow at the moment. There's basically everything. What I would like to share, if I may take some time, is something I was part of yesterday, where people from the Okavanga Basin were asking us, the people present there, to share their voices because they can't be heard by the more than 500 lobbyists that are from the fossil fuel industries that are part of the COP26, and they are facing death and eviction and disaster ecologically in their region, in their houses, because of oil exploration. So I just want to share their voices, and I'm going to put the details on the chat after.
This is the development we are looking for as Africa, as Namibia, as Botswana. After we have so long been the stewards of, or provided steward leadership to this our environment. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleading with you to say no to Recon Africa. No to oil exploration and gas. No! It is not fashionable in Europe. It is not fashionable in China. It is not fashionable in America. It's not fashionable in Canada. What makes us believe it will be fashionable and is of economic viability when it comes to Africa, particularly in Botswana and Namibia, who are the riparian states of the Okavango Delta, the jewel of the Kalahari, the biodiversity and the amazing cultures and people who are living there. So, with those few remarks, ladies and gentlemen, let's say no to Recon Africa and its exploration work. No! Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
It's pathetic that our parents, our leaders, which should have hopes and dreams for African children, are the ones selling us out. And there is little or nothing we can do. It's a privilege to stand right here because back home I could not dare to do this. I get locked up, I get picked up, and my family is not safe. But then what happens? The International Energy Association states that no new oil and gas exploration is compatible with the 1.5 degrees Celsius. And yet, even with the Paris Agreement, none of these organizations and companies and businesses have been able to narrow CO2 emission to 1.5. Yet they want to keep on exploring in Africa. So to me, I think it is more than just talk. It is more than COP 26. For crying out loud, it is 26. That means there has been COP 25. 25 different meetings of companies coming together and saying the same thing. Why they say something and do something else. But the thing is Africa. What can we do? We are the vulnerable ones. We are the ones that suffer it most, especially in the global south. We are the ones fighting for survival. We do not have the luxury of fighting for climate change because I cannot take the future you promised me when you cannot guarantee me of today. People are dying. I'm not talking about movies. I'm not talking about pictures. You sit down and you watch mothers crying over their kids because they died just because of hunger. It is excruciating. You live with that guilt for the rest of your life. A lot of you here may not really understand. To you, it might just be like, oh, it's what is being said. But I come here to tell you today, with my fellow brother, that is not just a story. It's not a made-up story. These are the lives of some people back in Africa. It's a privilege to stand here because I never knew I would get the chance. I do the little I can do back home, but it's not enough because you have the power. And you might ask me how. You have platforms. You can challenge your government. They listen to you. One way or the other, you know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody that works in these corporations. You know that what they are saying on the newspaper is not what they are doing in Africa. You have the voices. We are down there, we are living at the mercy of what you can do about it. And do not be deceived and think, oh, it's just going to be an African thing. If COVID-19 has taught me anything, is that when the earth fights back, it fights dirty. And it asks no question of either whether you are black or white. Please do not be deceived. COP26, my God, a lot of developed countries are yet to even pay the commitment they made in COP25 to make sure that these developing countries can survive. Clean energy is not difficult. It is good for the people and it is good for business. In Africa, we have sun, we have solar energy, we have wind, we have water. We can have clean energy in Africa. It doesn't have to be the oil that they are drilling. Do not be deceived. It is possible and it is good for business, but they do not care about us because they feel that within the confines of this country you are safe. But can I ask you a question? During COVID, the whole world was on lockdown, not just Africa. You were affected, even though you didn't contribute to COVID. You were touched, you were impacted. A lot of businesses are still being infected. Now imagine if hurricane should set in. Imagine if war should set in. Imagine that in the corner of your house, somebody is down in Africa dying just because some people want to make money. And yes, they get to have their status in public places. And what do we have? The skeletons of people dying. We have the graves to show for it. Please, do not be deceived. And I think personally that ecocide should be criminalized. You ask me why? Because number one, humans are driven by punishment and reward. If I say to everybody here today and say, oh, if you would give me a yes, if you will give me a yes answer, I would give you £1,000. Every one of you here will lift up your hand and say yes, because you have a reward for it. If these companies know that what they are doing is illegal and they cannot get away with it, they will not do it because it's bad for business. But then, ecocide is not being criminalized. So that it's a thin line. It's like, it's not that bad. But I'm telling you, it is that bad. Our lives depend on it. Our livelihood depend on it. Why should ecocide be criminalized? Because necessity drives adaptation. We've noticed that if this company thinks it's necessary, they would actually do something about it. But they think it's not necessary because people back home are comfortable. Because people back home do not raise their voices. But here you are gathered just to raise a voice and a platform for people like us to speak. So I do not take it for granted. Why should ecocide be criminalized? Because we are interdependent. We are all global village. With social media nowadays, you can know what's happening in Botswana, in Africa, in Nigeria. Do not be deceived. These are not just made up stories. These are the lives of children especially. These are the future of children. These are the future of the nation. It's not just about one person. Why should it be criminalized? Because life is at stake. One thing I've come to learn during COVID is that once you lose somebody, you cannot get him back. Yes, you might visit the grave every day and drop a rose every day there, but you know it's not the same feeling of losing somebody. Please, amplify our voices. Let this company know that back in Africa, we may not have the power and resources to fight them. But I have a brother in the UK. I have a sister in the US. I have somebody in Canada who would stand up and fight for me because we are one. If anything, we know that together we can beat anything. We are standing here today because we beat COVID and we are here. Together, we can win this fight against this oil. They are people. They are not ghosts. They have names. We can call them to order. Please join me. My name is Titilayo Adebayo, and I represent the voices of those on head. Thank you.
And just to end with a message of hope from some of the beautiful activists that I've met.
I'm here for hope, I guess. Being here and being with people that also care about our future is quite inspiring and hopeful. And so that's the kind of thing that keeps me going, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, I'm Polly, and I would definitely say that I'm here out of fear more than anything for our future and just the destruction that's happening, and all the tipping points that are going to happen with the environment if we don't have like radical action. but I definitely agree that what I find inspiring and what keeps me going in the fight is the hope and the sense of community of being with people who all care about our future, and that's what like lifts me up and means that I can keep on doing what I'm doing even though it can be really difficult sometimes. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say that there's people really bringing their message everywhere, individuals, organizations. I don't think I've ever met such a huge, diverse network of people really doing the bit, asking, demanding, whatever they can, with art, with rage, with beauty. It's really breathtaking. So I'm blessed for having this time in Glasgow.
Thank you, Dita. Thank you so much for bringing the messages here, because we do have an opportunity today to amplify these messages as they asked. Very powerful. Thank you. And as people have been asking in the chat, so how can cities play a role? Well, the city of Glasgow did play a role as a stage for these messages. So thank you so much for bringing it to us front and center. I would like to now call on Monica Sharma, who I can imagine has been in more than one similar situation in her life, as we're seeing in Glasgow and in other COPs. Monica, what are you seeing and what's touching your heart?
So Marilyn, what touches my heart is the power of people, the power of the voices we've heard this today, the constructs that bring us not only hope, but action with results. So for me this morning, whether it's Colin, whether it is Leonara, and then now Dita, and the voices, Dita, that you brought in, to me, it is the opening for a different kind of activism. And I would love to talk about that. I'd love to talk about three things, in fact. One is, what does next generation activism look like? Because that's all the elements that Colin brought together, that Leonara brought together, that Ida brought together, and the voices we heard. I'm sorry I didn't catch everyone's name, Marilyn, but thank you for bringing me into this inspirational space for action and results. I'd like to talk about that and perhaps show a few slides. I would like to talk about the capability towards the next generation activism that I think we are all geared. We are all geared, the way Colin spoke, the way Leonara, the way we heard our colleagues from Glasgow. So I'd like to talk about next generation activism. I'd like to talk about the capability for that. And, Leonara brought up systems thinking. And to me, it is the space to enter. And then Marilyn, the work that I think on metrics and measurement, it doesn't matter what frame we use, provided that frame includes what we wish to include. So let me begin with a few points on these, and then I'll show you some slides, and slides that bring us together. So to me, the first thing is the deepening of the conversation that Colin did, that Leonara did, that all of us did. We began with the greatest side of us, the part of our greatness, our ability to activate compassion and courage for action. That's what this call for action is. It's about the courage to act. And then so beautifully, I think it was Leslie who spoke about our heart, the hardware that Colin quoted from an income developing country, Malaysia. I call all so-called developed countries income rich countries. So this was from an income not so rich country, Malaysia, hardware. So how do we have courage? Comes from the Latin word heart. Cur is heart. When we have a broken heart, broken for the universe, we will be able to respond totally differently. And that's the invitation everyone is making. How do we do that? And that's what we've done worldwide. The stories that Marilyn said that, I've worked worldwide, yes. And in that book, she quoted, so thank you, Marilyn, Radical Transformational Leadership. There are about 100 stories from around the world. And like Colin said, the global South and the global North. It's from around the world, the courage and compassion we can have. When we touch that space, when we are able to act without our personal agenda or our social agenda, when work becomes a space of contribution, not just profit, to move beyond, work as profit to work as purpose. One of my colleagues said that. And so I'll walk you through a couple of stories around that. I'll invite you to build capabilities that are different. And what are those capabilities? Those capabilities written up in a couple of recent books on measurement by Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz. It's about how we have mismeasured and how capabilities, instead of GDP, could become the cornerstone of the change we wish to see. And so a little bit about capabilities. The capabilities of manifesting our inner capacity.
Monica, can I interrupt you for a second? Are you showing slides? Because we're not seeing them. Several people have
I am going to show it. Is
Great,
that
thank
okay?
you. Thank you.
I thought I'd go over it first, like a story, and then show the slide. Is that okay? Is that
That's
fine?
No,
Okay,
that's
okay,
fine, Monica.
perfect.
It's just people
Okay,
are
thank
asking
you.
questions.
I'll let you know when I show that slide. Okay, so
Thank
the
you.
capabilities are of three kinds that we encourage in the work that I do when Marilyn quoted my global work on transformation. So we don't have only the theory of transformation, we talk about the theory and practice of transformation. So that practice requires me to develop my hardware. Said Colin, my hardware. How do I connect with practical tools and templates, my hardware, to what Leonora brought up, my systems thinking, my mind, so that I make the decisions and I am called to act in complex situations. So this work is about dealing with complexity without making it complicated, making complexity, demystifying complexity, being able to have every citizen act. And so I'm going to talk about the metrics, because what we measure is what we move. So let me now begin with my slides. And now if you don't see it, let me know. And so I will do a share screen and I will begin with this slide and I will share the slide. And I will put it on, and let me go to the first slide. And there we go. And it is called the conscious as intentional. A group of business people came to the UN and said, we love the work you do, when I was the director of leadership and capacity development. And they said, you really have a response model, not an understanding model. Understanding important, but response is a broken heart for action. And so this is a response model that we've used, built on 700 practical examples quoted in the book. And so it's evidence-based, because we all need evidence that kindness works, love works, but never mind. So it's full spectrum. It's conscious because it's intentional. It's full spectrum because unfolding the whole self of you and me. It's me. expressing my full and it's a response. And we call it CFSR for short. What is that? So what the first thing we do when we work with governments, for me, it's always what Marilyn said, it's the four groups. It's the government, it's business, it's citizens, it's third parties, it's the entire spectrum. So let's say this is not just about governments, it's about the market state, that is like the influence of business on government, and that we actually have strategies that can heal the earth and our communities right now. It's just that these strategies are partial and in silos. So we have technical solutions. And like Colin said, we talk so much about that. And why is it at the core? Because that's what we focus on. But it's the smallest space. And then we have systems thinking. That was brought up by Leonara. And in a way, it was called, if we go back to the beautiful slide that Colin showed, that basically what she showed was the hardware. And then she said there was also software, because the system is largely invisible. Systems and cultural norms are invisible. To make that visible and visibilize it is part of our radical transformational leadership work. And then there is the next part, connecting these two. Largely, this is what we connect. And then there is our hardware, that we build leadership. Unfortunately, we build these separately. Unfortunately. So the work that we do that has created results worldwide, we have been able to document directly 4.5 million people as results and indirectly 130 just through one program. And we know it's much more. But when I can connect through absolutely well-tested, culturally relevant, multi-sector, multi-level, it means that in a program, we have people from national, regional, grassroots. We have people from business, media, and from the current digital world. And so we have people from all industry. And then how do we connect that? How do we connect that? And the 42 tools that we begin with over a 9-day program. And I only work with people who seek that out. It's not because for me, when I retired from the UN, when I was 60 years old at that time, and decided to work in a broader world, I want to support 100 world-class leaders who can reach 1 billion people each. Million people each, and create 10 other leaders like them. So I'm on number 53. I think before I die, those seeds will be sown and be wonderful. Please note something, because I'm going to go to metrics. When we measure immediate causes. Donut economics measures systems and cultural patterns, but we almost never measure what we call underlying factors, because this space of your greatness and mine, that where we stand for dignity for all, for equity for all, for regenerative mechanisms informed by equity, we call our work regenerative equity. Equity is part of us, We ache for fairness. Oxfam did a brilliant study. 92% of Americans believe in fairness. How great is that? Then why aren't we tapping into it? Do we know how to tap into that fairness? Do we use tools? Are we willing to learn? Are we willing to be lifelong learners? And so to me, a systems cause is what is addressed in the brilliance of the work that a lot of people are doing. Donella Meadows' work. And the way we work with systems is very clear. Everybody has a systems mind. Donella Meadows said so in her book, Intervening in Systems. And what we think is we need to be a PhD, 3 PhDs in systems thinking to activate that systems mind. No, that's what we do worldwide. We work with simple videos like Annie Leonard's piece on Story of Stuff, and people will activate their own pattern of systems thinking through a few questions, instead of us telling them what the system needs to be. And the transformational leadership is an underlying factor. And like Gandhi said, Mahatma Gandhi, we have enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed. So what is it in us through social media and through our cultural practice that we have said the bigger the house, the more important you are, the more your bank balance, the better it is, the larger your car and the more fancy your car, if you have 22 Rolls Royce, it's better than having like a bicycle to work. So we've created these paradigms through media, through our conversation, through our definitions of success. In this work, we redefine success. We redefine, just like Leonara said, to move from growth to prosperity. And we talk about this hardware as the engine of change, that our hardware, which is the underlying factor, and therefore we need proxy indicators. We've made many attempts at that, as you know, from the time we wanted to measure gross national happiness. But this is the conscious full spectrum response that Marilyn spoke of, that I have worked with people, and I feel that that's the fractal for scale. The only way I believe that every human being can participate in a global movement is to learn for what I can do at home, activate my inner capacity that's theirs, link it to this is in Advaita, in the Eastern philosophy, this is my space of oneness. This is the space of Advaita, where there is no each and other, as Rumi says. Rumi says, come meet me in that field where there is no each and other. And then from that space, I activate my systems thinking. And I call it a worldview generated from the courage and commitment I have, not based on ideologies alone. And of course, informed by science, but not driven by science. And so to me, everybody, a woman in India, because I was born in India, and I still work about 6 months in India, mostly now after COVID virtually, but otherwise live there. And so for me, this space exists in every man, woman, or person of any gender. It exists in the oil fossil fuel leader. It exists in the person. It's like Thich Nhat Hanh said, come call me by many names, because I am that. If I watch 32% of live streaming in cities of Europe and in North America was live streaming child pornography torture, and during COVID times, like entertainment. And of course, we can't get that data because it's privacy, remember? And so for me, the inability to transcend these cultural dichotomy, spaces requires me to embrace the greatness in everybody, activate that greatness. And it's like, so it is a fractal, a pattern. A fractal is a physics word. It means pattern. So when this becomes the pattern that is used by every single human being to respond to that call for action, that heartbreaking narratives that were just spoken from Africa, that has touched everybody who's listening. That's the piece that touched us. And so that is a space that everyone can act. Whether I am in an income developing country or a rich country, an income rich country. So suddenly we have a fractal that can go to scale, which is why our results are at scale. A fractal is a pattern that repeats itself. And it's simple enough, and yet it addresses complexity. It's what Buckminster Fuller said. I'm pitting the world around bloodless, constructive, design transformation revolution against a world around destructive, bloody revolution. The design science revolution can be won by all. The bloody revolution can be won by none. So I just want to invite you into that space. We've been called to act by what we heard from our brother and sister from Africa, standing in Glasgow. And so for me, that's the response. Then I want to bust a development myth. So when we learn all these theories of development, we have many theories of change. And yes, some of them are useful and some of them constrain us. I want you to know that everything you do is part of local, global action if we design it that way. So the second slide I wish to show you, and I will rapidly go through it, is a slide on fruition time for results. Because in our world today, we are told that, you know, we've had patriarchy for millions of years. How can you stop patriarchy like right now? Yes, we can. The new learning turns the fallacy, it takes time. Please go back knowing that if you learn the design tools and templates of a conscious full spectrum response, and you can read the book if you want, you can listen to Colin and Leonara and put all the threads together, and it will be that. And so for me, the fallacy is that immediate results cannot happen at the same time as long-term results. No, our data shows it can. It can. I can solve a problem, shift a system, and address the greatness, awaken the greatness of human beings to be in action. 2 practical examples from my work life that has evidence and is written in the book. When I was the global director of HIV and AIDS in UNDP, then we were told there are technical solutions like climate change. And why did I take health examples? Because it's easier for you to fit into climate change. So yes, there are technical solutions for climate change. I could have done this graph for the work we did on the coastal belt of India. Then there are systems and cultural responses, but they take more time. We can put technical solutions for HIV and AIDS, for parts of our solutions for systemic change, maybe in 25 years. You know, you can build like an infrastructure and then, but values and equity, oh my God, we've lived off a different thing. We need 1,000 years to change patriarchal practices or our biases around sexuality. But you know what? What we found is when we do the conscious full spectrum response, we are working on the technical solutions. When we learn how to connect that to systems thought and change through practical templates and tools, we are building systemic change. And then when we look at the underlying factors of my courage and commitment to step up and do what I need to do, what am I doing? I'm activating my greatness, my desire for every human being to live with dignity, my desire that in a world that can feed twice the number of people we have, 15 million people to 16. We have enough food if we had it properly and distributed it. 22,000 children go to, 22,000 people die of hunger every single day, most of whom are children. And so when I work this together, guess what I do? I create a new paradigm. I can do it at home. I can do it whichever way you wish. Just we can. And so for me, thank you, Colin. Thank you, Leonara. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Jim, for opening up the doors, for awakening this space. Thank you, my brother and sister from Africa, for breaking our heart open today. And please, are we committed to action and results, or are we committed to talking? Are we committed to ideological bases, or are we committed to awakening our hearts for action? Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you, Monica. That's so beautiful, the way you've called forth how we started the whole session with the heart wave. And I really am so encouraged all the time, myself being a radical optimist, finding that you are even more radical and even more optimistic and able to make things seem possible. So thank you. And we still have another panelist to hear from, and that's Duncan Crowley. And Duncan is, in my experience, one of the world's great synthesizers. So Duncan, can I invite you to come in and share your thoughts and maybe about what you thought you were going to say and also what you've actually heard today? Thank you.
I'll give it a blast, Marilyn. So first of all, thank you very much to yourself. And it's a pure pleasure to be here with such amazing, strong women and amazing people that are here today, including our friends from Africa who were given the space to amplify their voice through our technological tools. I'm from Ireland, and in the northwest of Ireland, we've got crosses up for Ken Saro-Wiwa and the other Nigerian people who were killed by Shell and the state in one of our own local struggles. And in Ireland, we've got a strong sense of solidarity, I suppose, from our own history and dealing with post-colonial issues. So I put up the flag here as well, going back to COP and why we're here. 10 years or no, 2009, we were on the streets with Indigenous leaders outside the Bella Center in Copenhagen when they were giving voice and trying to tell their stories and say their truths about what's happening in their communities and the rough truths of that. But more than that, trying to build a space to listen to each other, build a network so we can start taking action and then working out a strategy that we can start to use to make the change. So going back to what the COP, some of the outputs of the COP, first of all, listening to Tom Goldtooth, some of the views from him and other Indigenous leaders and the kids on the streets, the Fridays for Futures and Greta and the rest. I think it's very clear, first of all, that the COP itself has been a talking shop for the privileged few in the north and global north, which is a pity. Keep the fossil fuels in the ground, no more the blah, 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 give voices to those that aren't being listened to yet, the marginalized, the global south, the women, the people who are already being affected by climate emergency. Also about carbon colonialism, climate capitalism. I think that's an important thing that hasn't come up in this discussion today. What are the root causes? It's the economic system, which is holding on to what it wants to maintain its place. They know what's going on. Now people are starting to have the discussions. So leaving that, in terms of what's been talked about today, I'm coming from Ecolese and many other networks. Ecolese is a network of networks, including the permaculture worlds, transition towns, the global eco-village networks. And for decades, we've been working with the head, the hands, and the heart as well. And I think the heart is really the key, which has been touched on here today, because that's the only thing which will awaken all of us, regardless if we're north, south, wherever, whatever color, to stand up and start to take action and to look at where we can start to find leverage points to connect, develop solidarity, make the changes locally, and go and fight globally when we have to, like the football away in the home games. And I think that call to the adventure is really the key that excites people, that gives them the fight to keep at it over time. And it's something that we're starting to explore a little bit, but have a lot more to go. And what Monica was there talking about, the fractal, I think that's one of the keys to it, so that we can be effective in our street, in our neighborhood, then in our municipality, then in the city, the wider metropolitan area, the bioregion, and then within that network of bioregions in the global system on the planet together. To be able to think and to act and to be at all those scales is difficult. It's a challenge, but that's part of where some of us are at. And I think it's one of the keys of we're trying to open up that door and invite more people to participate in that adventure. So bringing it back to today's theme about regenerating cities, I have made a short presentation. I'll touch on that. I'm going to be very quick. So I'm just going to check if the presentation, oh no. Can I get a screen share assistance here?
What do you need, Duncan? You should be able to screen share.
Okay, I'll try it here. Okay, no.
You hit the share screen at the bottom?
Yeah, but it's not, I'm just getting a series of kind of no-go points.
I'm not sure what that is.
Okay, I won't do a presentation, and that's no problem. But I'm going to just use it to kind of remind myself of the few points I had. So apologies for that. I'll send it on. I don't know what caused that problem. Okay, so basically about regenerating cities. Well, the work we've been doing is and this is, I'm not going to get into, this is coming from a series of different groups and points. Some are activists, some are academic. Marilyn's been involved in some of them, thankfully, which was great. And I think it's all about weaving these different groups together, learning from and with each other, and then together moving forward. So I'm based in Lisbon, which was Europe's green capital in 2020. So, I suppose that's a good thing, and it was for various reasons. But in 2019, the city was designated by the kind of activist circles, the new capital in Europe of gentrification and evictions. And this raised the question of a regenerative city has to be a sustainable and a just city. It's no use just being sustainable, green, eco. If we're putting on this green, high-tech eco stuff, a lot of the time, local communities are being driven out. This city, Lisbon, is being driven out by forces of the fact that modern cities are part of the global financial game, where it's so much investment can be made, the returns are so massive that cities are being destroyed. The city I'm from, Dublin, at the moment, is a massive struggle is underway trying to save one bar, the Cobblestone, which is a traditional music point, which is designated to be squished in and closed in behind another new hotel. So the point I'm going to get to is about that citizens is really the key to making the cities, and the citizens can go further in demanding the change. So one of the projects we looked at, the Urbana project, looked at sustainable and just cities. And from that, we developed 17 keys and broke those into 4 clusters. These are the keys to, not solutions, but they're keys that might unlock and open up the transformation to enable the change we desire. So they were broken into 4 clusters: honest, caring, regenerative, informed. And within the regenerative urban cluster, there was 1, regional. Regional integration makes cities stronger. 2, art. Art creates a sense of belonging and has the power to transform places. 3, participation. Meaningful participation is empowering. And 4th, adaptation. Change is inevitable and adaptation essential. So from that, then I just was going to mention about the different scenarios that's been outlined by the permaculture world. And basically, there's a lot of belief in today's COP26. We're hearing all the false solutions, and I really believe they're false solutions, like this net zero system that they're using, and it's just this green tech. It's this idea that we can just keep on, tech will solve all the problems, and it won't, because we live in a finite planet, as the donut points to. We need to learn how to live within the planetary limits again. So being able to descend back to living within those limits, that's the permaculture energy descent, or the earth stewardship. And that's where we need to get to live within the 1.5 or better. And by what's being talked about in COP is nowhere near there. To point out about regenerative, the word itself, Bill Reid, and especially building on his work then, Daniel Wall in recent years, has really pointed out what is the problem and what's the difference between being sustainable or regenerative. Sustainable is not doing enough. It's just being a little less bad. So it's not fixing all the damage that's already done. whereas regenerative is working with the living systems. So it's appropriate participation and design as nature. And we are part of that. We are nature. So from that, then the donut, which has been pointed out, is giving us the compass to navigate through these kind of storms to get us to the place where we need to get to, using the metrics, and as well as that, not just the tool itself, but the beautiful way that it's opened up in an open source way, the tools to the wider global community, saying, here's the tools, here's the ideas, take them, use them, adapt them so it shifts for what you need to do in your local community, regardless of scale as well. So from that, what I've been working on and trying to look at is how can we take the learning from the eco-villages and apply that to the cities? That's a huge ask and a huge challenge. So we're looking at community-led eco-cities, and EcoLease itself is that meta network of all these different groups working in that area. The eco-city world has many problems because a lot of recent kind of the last 10, 15 years of that have been a lot of tech solutions where we get to the point where in Tianjin and other Chinese eco-cities, we see nice little trees in the middle of the city, but they're all actually dead with fake leaves tied on. So this is the level of artificiality. And it's also important to point out that these are creating new gated communities for the 1%, the select few who can get in there without thinking about how we can change everything for everybody, or give people the tools so that they can change everything for themselves at all those scales. So from that, then the Global Eco-Village Network idea is that communities are the drivers of their places, of their territories. So, if you're living in a little community of, let's say 200 people, that's at one level, it's still difficult. It's still a challenge because we've all got the social tensions and things that pop up in everyday life. But how to apply that to the city, that's the big challenge. So what we're looking at that is fractal governance, going back to what was spoken about earlier. If you think of a river basin, so a lot of the bioregion thinking is looking at the river basin. So for example, I'm here in the Tejo or the Tagus. So from Madrid to Lisbon, there's one huge big river basin and all those little river basins within. So you've got the big one, then you zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. That's one of the things that we're looking at that could be the basis of a kind of an eco-city model. And that goes beyond this idea of, well, the municipality line is here and this is one neighborhood, that's another one, because the river is a connector. It joins, it's not a divider, as unfortunately is the case in many situations. So in Curitiba in Brazil, we're exploring this and looking about how we can zoom right into the smallest little basin and use that as being a place where maybe assemblies could happen for the local community, decisions being made, and then that goes up to the next scale and then further up and further up. That might sound like and apologies now, I don't have the slides to kind of assist this because I know it's quite difficult to get your head around fractal, but you imagine like a circle built on a wider circle, built on a wider circle. That's kind of a tool that we're using, like sociocracy, which is a governance model that's been used by us and many other groups. And this might sound like kind of wishful thinking, but there's a lot of reference to Donna Meadows and the systems thinking. But this has been put into practice already. We've got the Municipalities in Transition project, which is using this in Sao Paulo, the Eco Barrio Sao Paulo. They've already got sociocracy being used in the municipal council, and they're affecting change. So basically, yeah, I'm going to finish up. Basically, what I was getting at was that governance is the key, and citizen engagement and citizens having a place to be part of the solution and thinking together to come up and think about, well, what does it mean in our local area? What do we want to build? What do we want to construct? Like, is it trees, cleaning the rivers, making food forests, etc., etc. And at the very end, what we're trying to do is build a community practice. It's to link these different communities, learn from together and work together. And that, I think, is one of the challenges. The COP26 coalition have done well to bring together many groups, but it's still a challenge. And you guys are doing it brilliantly because you are bringing together all these different groups, but it's still a challenge to get people to come out of their ghettos, their silos. And the last thing was just a picture of, at the end of the Asterix novel, you see the comic book, people around the table having a feast, eating and drinking together. And that's all part, again, of the adventure, because the thing in the modern world, more in the global north here, communities are dead. People don't know their neighbors. So these processes, if they're more localized, give us an excuse to connect with our neighbors, start to connect and dream together and live together and have beautiful experiences again. And that, I think, is part of the process which will start to get us out of the mess. So I'll leave it at that. And thank you very much for the opportunity. And sorry if it was a bit long.
Hey, Duncan, that was beautiful. You brought us beyond where Monica took us, back to our heart awakening from the beginning. And you wove in all the systems and citizen engagement, and you ended up in a place that I love. I would have called it a meshwork is what you're looking for. And really thank you for sharing not only the insight in the systems, but all the cities that you have been really influential in, making a difference in, and experimenting, because there's so much learning involved for us here. There's not, it's not accidental that we look at cities as complex, adaptive, learning, living systems. And you really brought that picture home to us. So thank you so much. I would also like to remember from yesterday when we looked at citizen action networks, that was one of the propositions that Indra Adnan and the group spoke of how to weave things together. And I think that I would like to bring us to a final picture that you spoke of, the need to connect globally. And I'm going to call in the invocation from Jude Curvan, who's really moved us up to, beyond thinking even globally. She says, think cosmically, feel globally, act locally. And that is what we're being asked to do. Even when we go back to the first day of our COP26 coverage, when Vandana Shiva said, if you look at Greta, that she should be taking her Fridays off, but all the rest of the days of the week, she should be actually out working and acting in the ways that you and Monica, Colleen, and Lenora have all brought in today. So I'd like to thank the panel so much for giving us a deep exploration of why I do think that cities can be Gaia's regeneration hubs. So Jim, I can see you're there, and I'd like to turn it over to you and sign us out.
Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Duncan, and Leonora, Monica, etc., who spoke to us today. Thank you, Dita, for your ongoing reports from Glasgow. It's been so inspiring to see the videos that you've been bringing in of the young people today, and the urgency and the sincerity and the authenticity with which they're speaking so passionately about the need to really, for all of us, to get a grip on the urgency of the situation and to take action. So thank you for that. We'll have to bring this session to a close. We're a bit over time. Tomorrow, everyone, we're going to be looking at the oceans. We think of the tipping points having to do with the melting of the Arctic ice cap, or the ice shelf over Greenland, or the fact that we've passed 420 parts per million. But we're in the midst of the biggest tipping point of all, and that's the warming of the oceans, where most of the CO2 actually ends up. And when the oceans go, it's basically game over. And so tomorrow we're going to look at what's happening in the oceans with a group of scientists who've been studying these matters for many, many years. And then we'll move into other areas. We'll be covering the Amazonia later on in the program. And so thank you all for joining us today. You're all welcome to the after chat session. Those of you who can make it, Stanley will put the link in the chat box. And there you have it. Leslie, you just jumped on. Do you want to say anything quickly?
Just keep hiving away, as Marilyn would say. Let's keep meshing away, hiving away. We have a goal. Let's keep on pumping that number on that globe. I want to see a spinning globe full by Friday.
Yeah. The Global Regeneration Core.org, everyone.
.com.
It's there for all of us to join. I've joined. All of us should be joining, either as organizations or as individuals, and help create a global beehive of regeneration. That's right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you here again tomorrow. Bye for now. Thank you, Marilyn.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Dita.